Good morning and welcome to the 16th meeting of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee for 2025. We have apologies from Mark Griffin, and I welcome Paul O'Kane, who is joining us online. Our first item of business is a decision on whether to take items 5, 6 and 7 in private. Are we all agreed? Thank you. So our next item of business is to continue taking oral evidence on our inquiry into financial considerations when leaving an abusive relationship. I welcome to the meeting CoCab Stewart, Minister for Equalities, Simon Coote, Head of the Cross-Cutting Policy Unit, Janine Kellett, Head of the Homelessness Unit, James Missis, Council Tax and Reform Policy Team Leader, and Eileen Flanagan, Policy Manager, Scottish Government. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I invite the Minister to make some brief opening remarks. Thank you. Over to you.
Very grateful to the committee for inviting me along to contribute to your considerations on the financial issues when leaving an abuser. Obviously, these cover many ministerial portfolios, so I will certainly do my best to assist the committee. However, if there are areas across portfolios, I am more than happy to provide supplementary information for you. I want to begin by stressing that this government is resolute in the belief that coercive control, including financial abuse, has no place in Scottish society, and it's why we introduced the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2024, which criminalises this behaviour. As many respondents noted, our Equally Safe strategy explicitly addresses financial and economic abuse. It recognises perpetrators control finances and women's access to employment and opportunities. It highlights women's financial inequality with men enables that abuse. It also acknowledges that structures and systems exacerbate that inequality and act as a barrier to women leaving. Under the auspices of the Equally Safe, it is imperative that we continue to identify and address barriers that hinder survivors leaving abusers. Regarding social security, I recognise the importance of that issue on this agenda, and in Scotland we have built a radically different social security that supports those who need it, including women and children experiencing domestic abuse. Social Security Scotland staff, including a dedicated safeguarding team, are trained to identify and support those experiencing abuse. However, as the committee is aware, much social security in Scotland, particularly universal credit, remains reserved to the UK Government. I note the many comments made by stakeholders about the UK Government's benefits, and I'm sure that the committee would wish to engage with the DWP on those matters. We, of course, remain keen to work with the DWP, for example, on splitting of the universal credit payments, which stakeholders have told us is essential to remove a major enabler of domestic abuse. While the Scottish Government has some limited powers over changing how universal credit is paid in Scotland, the delivery of split payments remains entirely dependent upon the DWP. In relation to council tax, we acknowledge that joint and several liability may sometimes cause harm. That is why we are committed to supporting an amendment to the Housing Scotland Bill that will require a review of its impact in cases of domestic abuse. This is a crucial step in helping councils to handle such sensitive situations with care and understanding. With regards to legal aid, our programme for government commits us to taking forward actions set out in the recently published legal aid reform discussion paper, including bringing forward regulations to simplify the Judicare system. We are determined to support women to get the access that they need. We have provided funding for a pilot project in Edinburgh that provides an early intervention service offering legal advice to women and children impacted by domestic abuse. Next week, the Minister for Victims and Community Safety is due to give evidence to the Equality, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee on civil legal aid and what this government is doing. With regards to no recourse to public funds, it is important that the no recourse to public funds condition is applied to people who are subject to immigration control under the law, which of course is wholly reserved to the UK Government. It is our position that the UK Government should immediately remove and cease to apply no recourse to public fund condition to people in vulnerable circumstances, including women experiencing domestic abuse. Through our Ending Destitution Together strategy, we are seeking to mitigate and prevent destitution for people with no recourse to public funds. We are supporting Fairway Scotland to deliver no recourse to public funds, inclusive casework and emergency cash support. We, of course, continue to press the UK Government to extend the migrant victims of domestic abuse concession to make it available to anyone who is in the UK as a dependent on someone else's visa or protection status. So, to conclude, Convener, the committee recognises the need to ensure service provision is fit for purpose and responds to the needs of those of whom it is designed to benefit. We are committed to ensuring we have a process in place to keep improving and to deliver. And I look forward to engaging with the committee.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was very helpful. And we have, heard from a wide range of witnesses, including a visit that we had to Financially Included as well, which was really informative. So can I ask you how the Scottish Government are going to help to ensure there is comprehensive trauma-informed advice and support available on the financial aspects of leaving an abusive relationship?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, so Social Security, hang on a second, I think. Can you just repeat the...
It was really just to make sure that the advice and the support that's going out there is trauma-informed included in that.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I've got so much information. It's like an exam test, isn't it? In that sense. Sort of flicking. There we are. Yeah, I mean, sort of like having a trauma-informed approach, of course, is essential. And we realise that, sort of like the... Financial abuse in domestic abuse contexts can mean sort of abusive partners claim also social security benefits, further trapping victims and survivors who risk that. So our charter that we have commits Social Security Scotland to adopt a trauma-informed practice as standard practice, and the agency is working actively to embed trauma-informed practices across the organisation. All of Social Security, Health and Social Care staff undergo training on trauma-informed practices in conjunction with NHS Education for Scotland, and Social Security Scotland's induction programme includes trauma awareness, and the workforce, including local delivery advisors, they complete annual training which covers the principles of safeguarding, abuse and public protection. And as is part of sort of like the commitment in providing a learning service, Social Security Scotland obviously welcomes that feedback from clients, because obviously it's really important that that cuts through and their experience is as good as it can be. So we take that feedback from clients, colleagues and stakeholders, and that then helps to inform any changes changes that we need to make. And of course, Social Security Scotland are continually revising their guidance to make sure that people are, well, women are as best supported as possible. I hope that's helpful.
Undertook trauma-informed training amongst the members here in the committee as well, and it was really, really helpful in light of the fact that, some of the areas that we're working in and the witnesses that we bring in, but even just for our own casework as well, we found it really, really helpful. So, but thank you. But again, in terms of knowledge and skills, and just helping improve that, what are the Scottish Government actually doing across the full range of services that people come into contact with, such as local authorities, the legal profession? You've touched upon social security, but also financial institutions as well. Can you maybe touch upon that?
Yeah, so, I was sort of like, there's not much more I can add to, because obviously it's so much about the ethos of engagement. And as I've said before, it's ensuring that that consistent approach and that training sort of like cuts across anyone who is coming in contact with a survivor. That service has to be consistent, because obviously women are in a very traumatic state. And their situations are often complex, and being able to sort of like navigate across all those systems is really, really important. So it's just, I would just reiterate that, absolutely committed to that, and I've outlined the various sort of like trainings that are available, and making sure that that is consistent across anyone that a woman comes across.
Thank you for that. And what progress, you touched upon it in your opening statement, but what progress has been made on the commitment in Equally Safe to develop a national framework on training and workforce development? And can you identify and respond to touching upon the economic and financial abuse, if that's going to be included in the training as well?
Yeah, so you'll be aware that the Equally Safe in Practice framework was published by Scottish Women's Aid during the 16 days of activism in 2024. The Scottish Government and Scottish Women's Aid and other partners, they continue to sort of like promote and develop that approach. As I said, it's like making sure that Scottish Women's Aid are the experts in that area. So, what we're doing, I'm trying to demonstrate, is that we're not doing this in isolation. We're making sure that we're working with the correct partners who have expertise in that area, and making sure that all our practice is informed by them.
Thank you. I'm now going to bring in Gordon MacDonald. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Minister. As part of the inquiry, we've heard and saw written evidence that a high proportion of debt relates to council tax debt, and sometimes council's debt recovery practices are such that they make the financial position of people worse. So what's the Scottish Government doing to promote good practice in how public debt recovery takes account of financial and economic abuse?
Yeah, obviously it is a huge concern, and we recognise that that kind of sort of financial control and debt in abusive relationships can adversely impact survivors, and this of course includes public debts such as rent and council tax arrears. So through the Housing Bill Scotland 2024, we are taking steps to improve how social landlords can respond to these circumstances, requiring them to develop and to implement domestic abuse policies, and to provide specialist support before legal action is taken on arrears that are connected to domestic abuse. We are also committed to bringing Part 2 of the Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Act of 2021 into force in December 25, and that will enable courts to transfer secure tenancies away from perpetrators and give victims the option to remain in their home safely. And more broadly, of course, the Scottish Government recognises the impact that public debt can have on people in vulnerable situations. And of course, we encourage all public bodies to adopt the best practice in debt collection and advice. We are investing £2.2 million to expand Citizens Advice Scotland Council Tax Debt Project, which provides tailored support to affected households and promotes best practice in debt collection across local authorities. And I'm fully aware that this is a complex and multifaceted area, and I'm quite happy to bring James in, who will be able to maybe provide further information to the member.
Before James comes in, could you maybe touch upon Financial Conduct Authority for banks brought in the consumer duty, and that consumer duty says that they have to support customers in financial difficulty, and also they can give the option of payment holidays, reduced payments. So is that the kind of area that the government is looking at, and should we have a code of practice on public debt?
Yeah, I think you.
Yes, certainly. So I'll touch on council tax there, and it seems like you're talking about a sort of broader practice that you've observed elsewhere. So, as the Minister mentioned, Scottish ministers are working very closely with COSLA through the joint working group on council tax reform to improve the adoption of best practice on debt collection. So best practice involves things like early engagement. It includes things like supportive communication, referrals to the right services, and discussion around payment arrangements and things like that. So all really useful things. But part of this as well is the role of data. Like, data is incredibly important, and that joint working group is trying to open up the data pathways between other departments, UK government and Scottish government, with local authorities, so they can better identify debtors who are vulnerable and offer them support, notably through the Council Tax Reduction Scheme, which is Scotland's primary means of reducing liabilities.
And will that also include the ability for local authorities to write off council tax debt?
I can come back in on that one. Yeah. So council tax is a local tax, and local authorities already have the power to write off council tax arrears. And we're fully aware that there are unique circumstances to collection of council tax, such as joint and several liabilities, which can cause harm in cases of domestic abuse. So that is why we're supporting an amendment to the Housing Bill requiring a review of how council tax arrears can affect those experiencing domestic abuse. And I think that that will be a critical step to better inform policy and improve that support. We are, as James sort of referred to, exploring that issue through that partnership with local government through the joint working group on council tax reform. We do have, there is the council tax reduction scheme that exists to ensure that, nobody in Scotland should have to meet a council tax liability that clearly they can't afford it. There is no way that they're going to be able to pay it, and they shouldn't be expected to. So that scheme reduces a household's liability based on the assessment of their income, capital, and other circumstances as well. So, yeah, the long and short of it is that councils already have that ability to do so.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to bring in Marie McNair. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Minister and your officials. Something that I'm interested in is how we assist with the cost of the school day. And one of the public debts that's been raised is the cost of the school meal debt. But what I have noticed recently is Western Bartonshire Council, my constituency, failed to apply for the Scottish Government for funding to wipe out the school debt owed by some of the poorest families within my constituency. And indeed, they're apparently still pursuing this debt. I'm kind of astonished by this situation. Does the Minister kind of share my feelings and is she aware of any barriers that would deter councils from actually applying for this funding?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've taken an interest in sort of the cost of the school day for a number of years ago as a teacher. I do remember, I think it was about 10, 11 years ago that my school that I was teaching in took part in the pilot to assess the cost of the school day. And it was quite remarkable, the effects that can have on children and families and their experience in general, but the compounding factor on those with protected characteristics, but then going on to also those that are in households where they're experiencing domestic violence. So it is something that I take really, really seriously. And I mean, absolutely recognise the pressure on families that isn't helped, I suppose, by the cost of living crisis as well. So we took action on creating an emergency fund to address school meal debt. And this fund was increased from 1.5 million to 2.8 million in response to the demand from local authorities. Now, there were 30 local authorities that applied for support through this fund, and we've taken steps to obviously issue the payments totalling the 2.8 million that I just referred to. So, the member will be aware that local authorities are responsible for the management of school meal debt, and we expect them to use their existing powers to support families appropriately. COSLA has published good practice guidance, and it is our expectation that councils follow that guidance. So I suppose 30 out of 32 have sort of done that. I mean, I would be very interested to see what barriers were faced by the council that the member mentions in particular that has prevented them from applying for the fund, and obviously will continue to support dialogue with all local authorities, including Western Bartonshire Council that you've mentioned.
I'm due to be meeting with the Chief Executive and I actually had to kind of rearrange a meeting, but I'm meeting with them, I think it's next week, so I'll certainly get more information, and if I do require assistance, I'll bring it by your office. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We're very keen to understand why, but I mean, 30 out of 32, I think that demonstrates that there is there has been a massive uptake, but yeah, we can address the other sort of anything that's missing, we can address that, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to invite Bob Doris in. Thanks.
Just incredibly briefly, Convener. Good morning, Minister. I was really pleased to hear that you're very keen to look at the cost of the school day. It was the questions that Marie was exploring. When women leave a household, they don't always leave with all their belongings and clothes, and they've got children. I don't expect you to say yes to this today, but in relation to the cost of the school day, school clothing grants, for example, are issued once a year. Could there be circumstances where a bit of flexibility in relation to an additional application for a school clothing grant be considered where there's women fleeing domestic and economic abuse from a perpetrator? So it's just for consideration rather than saying we should do it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, sort of like, as I said, as a government and, through our agencies, through Scottish, the Social Security Scotland, I've reiterated that it is a learning sort of situation, and, very interested to take on and consider. So, yeah, once the committee sort of like comes up with its recommendations, I'd be absolutely happy to consider what is put in it, and brought forward. But thank you for raising that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to invite Jeremy Balfour in.
Good morning, Minister, and good morning to your team. I wonder, just before we move off council tax, I'm a wee bit confused. What is the government's position? I appreciate having these consultations, but what's the government position in regard to someone who's leaving a domestic abuse situation? Should a local authority go after them for the council tax arrears or not? I appreciate it's each local authority makes a decision, but what is the Scottish Government's view on that? Should a local authority do that or not?
Can I bring James in on that?
Certainly. So I think the point we're trying to progress here is ensuring local authorities have all the information, are furnished with all the information so that they can take that decision, so that on the ground they're aware of what's going on, and on balance, if they can make a determination, it's a matter for them, as the council tax is a local tax, but let's ensure that they have all the information necessary to make that decision.
So Scottish Government don't have a view on domestic abuse and council tax?
I'm not sure what you're trying to...
Well, I'm trying to say, so if a local authority comes to Scottish Government, I'm asking for the Scottish Government view. I appreciate it's ultimately for local authorities to make the decision, but does Scottish Government have a view on whether local authorities should be pursuing those who are fleeing from domestic abuse or not?
Well, I think I sort of... apologies if I didn't make it clear, but the Scottish Government's view is that local authorities should be undertaking their duties in assessing the situation as thoroughly as possible, in as sensitive way as possible, and making their decisions on that. I did also, I think, mention that nobody should be liable to be paying anything that they clearly cannot afford. Councils have the right to be able to write off council tax debt. The Scottish Government supports that position, that if it is deemed and assessed that that debt should be written off, then it should be written off.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Moving on, I wonder, we've taken evidence from a number of people, and there's been an issue of the Scottish Government creating a permanent national fund to leave. I'm just wondering, how much have you costed this at, and is it something that you're looking to bring forward, and what timescale?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, you'll be aware that the Scottish Government invested £500,000 in the Fund to Leave over a 5-month period in 5 local authority areas. So at this moment in time, there has been no decision that has been made on the rollout of the Scottish Government, and we haven't as yet investigated the cost of a national or a permanent scheme. So that is not a no. It's just that, let's be clear, it is with the appropriate ministers. That isn't myself. But no decision has been made on that. As with any pilot that is undertaken, it is undertaken in the spirit of experimentation so that we can test the impact of the fund, particularly with a view to improving outcomes, and initial evaluation of the impact found that it helped over 500 women experience domestic abuse whilst also facing financial hardship due to that. So we're in that evaluation phase, and so, like in any evaluation and any pilot project, what we then have to do is to stand back and reflect on what other supports are already available in other areas of investment. For instance, the Scottish Government invests quite significantly, £97 million, for instance, in the year 25 to 26 in discretionary housing payments, and that enables local authorities to assist eligible households who are struggling with housing costs, for instance. So it's there's also the £41 million in the Scottish Welfare Fund as well. So at the moment, as I said, there has been no decision, but there is an evaluation going on.
I'm grateful. I appreciate it doesn't fall under the Minister's portfolio, but would she be able to get the appropriate Minister to write to the committee so we could have a date on when that review is likely to be complete and the outcome of that review?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just moving on to split payments, and you mentioned that in your statement, and we'll come on to universal credit one in a moment, if that's okay, Minister, but I'd be interested to know, and again, I appreciate it's not under your own portfolio, but the Social Security Act that was passed by this Parliament was also there to introduce split payments for benefits done by Social Security Scotland. And I'm just wondering if there was an update on regard to how that process is going in regard to the split payments, particularly those from domestic abuse situations under Social Security Scotland.
Simon, are you?
Yeah, I can come in not well informed on, to answer that question, really. Split payments mainly is relevant to universal credit, and obviously I think you're going to move on to asking a question about what we're doing in relation to universal credit. There's been some discussion around split payments for Scottish Child Payment. At the moment, the policy is for that Scottish Child Payment to be paid to one individual in the household. Where there's a dispute around who that individual should be, Social Security Scotland would seek information from both the disputing parties and examine that information to come to a view on who would be the most appropriate person to care for the child and to receive the Scottish Child Payment. I can't add more than that just now, Minister.
So again, I mean, under the Act, there is a duty on Scottish Government to do split payments. So are you saying that that's not ever going to happen with the Scottish Child Payment? It's always going to be paid to one person?
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, in terms of what's in the Act and any work that's being done in relation to split payments for other benefits, we can write to inform the committee and provide further information around that, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be so. Appreciate that. Thank you. Moving on to universal credit, which the Minister mentioned in her opening statement. What response has the Scottish Government had from DWP to its policy design specification for universal credit split payments?
The Scottish Government, I believe, received a letter from the DWP on the 3rd of July last year, noting the receipt of the policy design specification and reiterating the complexity of the ask. The letter did list some of the challenges of delivering the policy, including the potential barriers and cost of carrying out the impact assessment on the policy and the challenges in delivering it in the near future. The Scottish Government, I believe, have acknowledged this letter, and the Cabinet Secretary met with Sir Stephen Timms to discuss the review of the universal credit and highlighted the importance of split payments policy and the need for the universal credit review to include a gendered analysis on that. So we remain committed to working with the DWP towards the delivery of split payments of universal credit.
Yeah, I mean, again, I appreciate it's not the Minister's portfolio, but that's 10 months ago since the letter was written. Obviously, the Cabinet Secretary has met with a counterpart at Westminster. Again, I'm not expecting you to answer today, but could we have an update on how that discussions went? And again, what timescales are we looking at if there is going to be any progress on this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to pass that to the relevant. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And then my final question, glad to hear, Minister, is that in regard to the Scottish Welfare Fund, has the Scottish Government got a view on whether they can provide help with rent in advance and also a 5-week wait for universal credit for survivors of domestic abuse?
Yeah, so support with rent in advance, including rent deposits, is provided through the discretionary housing payments, and an individual may be awarded a discretionary housing payment for a rent deposit, rent in advance, and of course other lump sums for a housing payment, such as, you know, as I said, deposits, but also like removal costs as well, and also. Yes, so for the property that the individual is yet to move into as well, if they're already entitled to housing benefit or universal credit, which includes an amount for rent in their present home. However, it should be noted that some local authorities will provide this type of support through schemes other than discretionary housing payments, such as a budget loan, for instance. So following an extensive period of review, the work of the multi-stakeholder standing statutory guidance review committee, the Scottish Government has provided updated statutory guidance for the Scottish Welfare Fund, and that revised statutory guidance published in April this year states that decision makers can prioritise applications by need, and that staff delivering the fund should be able to recognise and respond appropriately to people escaping domestic abuse, and that has to include an understanding of what constitutes domestic abuse, including coercive control and financial abuse. And, you know, they should have established good relations and the referrals process with specialist domestic abuse sort of services. And as I think I mentioned earlier, we're also working with organisations such as the Scottish Women's Aid via forums such as the Scottish Welfare Fund Practitioners Forum as well.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Now going to invite Bob Dorison. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener. Minister, can I just before I move on to the next section, can you just ask a little bit about Jeremy Balfour's line of questioning? And I think come quite consistently in evidence that women need a pathway to leave. Sometimes leave a victim or survivors leave on a crisis situation, but sometimes they know for a long time and it's making that final step to leave that abusive relationship. And as Mr Balfour said, that 5-week wait is a major challenge. Being able to apply to universal credit in confidence and get certainty that an award will be issued seamlessly up front doesn't happen. Likewise, community care grants and crisis grants can take into account domestic abuse, and we've heard about the fund to leave. Minister, I suppose what I'm asking is whether or not you think consideration has to be given working cross-government and between the DWP and the Scottish Government to give that financial certainty for a woman when she decides she must leave an abusive relationship, and a package of measures should be put in place before a woman has to leave, often with children, fleeing an abusive relationship. That would be real partnership work. It would be the end of the 5-week wait, and it would be changed to some of the criteria for Scottish Government grants also. Is that a piece of work that you think you could take forward cross-government with me, Shirley Ann Somerville, and between the Scottish and the UK governments, that pathway to leave?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, Mr Doris, you sort of like raised very, very sensible points there. And I mean, we always sort of like, you know, encourage and have that ethos of, you know, the fact that decision makers, you know, they strongly advise that when they're, you know, so awarding sort of crisis grants, they should sort of like be aware that the award meets the awards that are made, they meet the period of crisis to avoid repeat applications as well. And sort of like for an applicant on universal credit, if it is known that the next payment is more than 2 weeks away, the decision maker can make an award that is longer in duration. So there is that flexibility there, but you make a good point in making sure that, you know, that is possibly more consistent. Is that what you're sort of going along?
I suppose in a rather long-winded way, as always, and I apologise for that. What I'm saying is, do you think you could work with the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice and the UK Government to get a package of measures in advance of a woman leaving to make sure she has cash in her pocket and certainty at the point she leaves, rather than being in crisis after she leaves?
Yeah, well, I can only reiterate that we are always on standby to work with the UK Government because, you know, whilst we have certain benefits that we have created, we know that, you know, things like universal credit are down to the DWP, so it does require both parties to be able to do that. And I'm sure that, you know, with the emphasis of that from the committee is welcome for that joint partnership. But absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've my money's worth out of that, Minister. Can I ask then, there's going to be a new legal duty for social landlords to develop and implement a domestic abuse policy. Equally Safe commits to supporting social landlords to that, and to do that in relation to their gender equality commitments. How's that going? What work's been taking place in relation to that? Because that's within Equally Safe.
Well, with regards to the housing, I'm going to bring in Janine.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mr Doris. Yeah, there is work already underway to prepare the social housing sector to embed gender equality. So the guidance has already been produced, and it was co-produced by ALACHO, the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers, the Chartered Institute of Housing in Scotland, the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, Shelter Scotland and Scottish Women's Aid. So they've produced good practice guidance for social landlords to support them to respond effectively to tenants of theirs that are experiencing domestic abuse or at risk of domestic abuse. And we, as part of the preparation for the implementation of the Housing Bill, we will work with all relevant stakeholders to develop the necessary guidance and training to ensure that new policy requiring social landlords to have a domestic abuse policy, we want that to be a success. We'll make sure the guidance and training is right to enable us to do that.
Okay, I find it a reassuring answer. I don't want to follow up on that. I think that's pretty strong. The committee has heard how the high cost of refugee accommodation, the lack of suitable temporary accommodation and the high cost of housing will all contribute to the difficulty of leaving an abusive relationship. In what ways is the Scottish Government taking this into account when developing its housing policy? And again, Minister, I get that's cross-portfolio and it's also cross-government. Some of those structural issues is a Home Office matter as well. But what is the Scottish Government trying to resolve these matters? Yeah,
no, thank you for that. I mean, there are, significant pressures, and the member will be aware, representing the Glasgow constituency, that there are particular pressures that, we recognise, and particularly in the Central Belt. We have targeted funding in 2024-25 to the local authorities with the most sustained temporary accommodation pressures, and 80% of the 80 million capital funding for voids and acquisitions over 24-25 and 25-26 has been targeted to areas with the most sustained temporary accommodation pressures to increase that supply of social and affordable homes through acquisitions, and where appropriate to bring long-term empty social homes back into use. And that policy is designed to reduce long periods in temporary accommodation, especially for families with children, because we absolutely recognise that that is not a suitable place for children, families, and especially those that are experiencing or fleeing from domestic violence. Okay, thank you for that. Final question. I'm very aware that Glasgow City Council has been a Glasgow MSP as well, and see some of these issues firsthand in relation to New Scots wanting to get their leave to remain in status to stay in the country, very quickly become homeless into that system. The Glasgow City Council and Paul McClellan, were housing ministers, made representations to the UK Home Office, who seem to be shirking their duty and responsibilities to make sure a proper support is in place. That's from a housing perspective in the Scottish Parliament. You were Equalities Minister
COCAB. I'm just wondering if you've added your weight to those calls.
I certainly have. Thank you very much for that question. I did, in fact, yesterday take part in sort of like a Four Nations. So I suppose I met with my equivalents across the Four Nations, and I specifically raised the issue of the housing pressures in Glasgow. Now, I am aware that the Westminster government has put out sort of, I suppose, tenders. They're preparing for asylum accommodation. The current contract, you'll be aware, is with Mears, and that expires in 2029, I believe, although I'm happy to have that fact-checked. And they have sort of basically given an option of different ways of managing accommodation and investment in housing through central funding through the UK government. I know that Glasgow City Council has put in a bid, and I did press the UK government as strongly as I could yesterday to be cognisant of that pressure, because we are seeing trends that once people are given leave to remain, that they're actually choosing to come to the Central Belt. So because of our New Scots refugee strategy that we have and making sure that people are welcome from day one, we do provide that provision. But that, of course, then you know, people want to be with people that are like them. Sure. You know, they want to be in communities. So whilst we sort of provide that offering, and we're very proud of it, the inevitable additional resource pressures that comes with that. So I can assure you that just yesterday, hot off the press, okay. Mr. Doris.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. In terms of the no recourse to public funds, what progress has been made on the commitment and equally safe to mitigate the challenges associated with the conditions?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, sort of like no recourse to public funds. I mean, the biggest barrier is that policy of no recourse to public funds. That is it. So, you know, it is a condition, as you'll be aware, that's applied to sort of people who are subject to immigration control, as it were, under the UK immigration law, and public funds are defined in the UK immigration rules. So we know, and you know, the committee will be aware that those that have no recourse to public funds can experience extreme poverty. You know, they're more prone to rough sleeping, even more prone to domestic abuse and labour exploitation as well. As well as sort of like, you know, the social isolation and exclusion that can go with one being part of an immigration sort of system, such as it is, but then they can't even access sort of like the basic supports that are available for those who are in crisis. So we know all that, and you know, our opinion is that the UK government should immediately remove and cease to apply the no recourse to public funds, that condition, to people who are in vulnerable situations, particularly in the case of like children and families, vulnerable adults, women who, you know, are experiencing domestic violence, all of that. You know, I do want to reiterate that, you know, Scotland's sort of long history of, you know, welcoming people of all nationalities, those that are seeking refuge, you know, fleeing war, religious persecution, all of that. And we know that they want to rebuild their lives. So not to be able to have that recourse to public funds, as I said, they should cease to apply that immediately.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Minister. I'm now going to invite Paul O'Kane. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to the Minister and to officials. The committee is particularly interested in legal aid and access to legal aid, and I know that there's work ongoing across the Parliament, certainly in other committees such as the Equalities and Human Rights Committee. But I suppose it would be useful first to get the Minister's view of work the government is undertaking to reform legal aid. So obviously there's a short-term piece of work, which is not as broad as I think people had hoped would be achieved in this Parliament, but there's a commitment to a longer-term piece of work that might involve legislative change. From looking at those sorts of consultation documents the government has produced, it doesn't seem to cover sort of the issues that we are discussing around financial abuse and domestic abuse more widely. So is that something that the Minister sees as being a priority, and how is she working to influence, I suppose, the wider review with her Justice colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I think I mentioned in my opening remarks that obviously this is Ms Brown's portfolio, so I will absolutely do my best to give a good account, but I would encourage the committee to, well, I can certainly follow up on anything that I can't explain today. So, I mean, it's sort of, I mean, the civil legal aid system is generally effective in delivering help to those in need. However, we do recognise that there are some challenges in relation to certain types of cases or locations. And I suppose sort of like going into a little bit, you know, into the detail of it, the issue of solicitor availability, for instance, that's being explored by the Scottish Legal Aid Board, and sort of like since 2014-2015, there has been a large variation in the number of grants in the civil legal aid at council level. Local authorities with the largest increase are Shetland Islands, for instance, Perth and Kinross, West Lothian. There is an increase of applicants instructing solicitors outside their own council areas, but it is important to remember that we can't compel private solicitors to undertake work, but the government has continued its investment in the legal aid system. I'm happy to come back in on, so, you know, I think there were many elements to your question, so I'm happy to be reminded of elements of it.
Sure, and I of course appreciate this, as I said, sits with the Minister's Justice colleagues, but I suppose from an Equalities point of view, you know, this committee and indeed the Equalities Committee have heard evidence where women who are leaving a relationship that's abusive are having to very often go round, you know, tens and tens of solicitors to try and find access to support. Very often they miss out in terms of financial thresholds for support, and very often their abusive partner actually finds a way to intervene, essentially, to prevent them from accessing that assistance. So, I mean, obviously with her equalities brief, I mean, does she share this committee and the other committee's concern? And what does she view her role as, I suppose, in terms of helping to drive forward the review to make a change here? Because I appreciate what she says about not being able to compel solicitors, but there is clearly a role for government to work with SLAB, you know, to push this forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I mean, from the principle of equalities, I absolutely recognise that reform is needed to the legal aid system. You know, we want to ensure that it is responsive, it is user-centred, it works effectively, you know, towards the delivery of, you know, the outcomes that we want in a way that we would expect of public services. And that has to be done transparently, there has to be accountability in that, and you know, it has to be embedded across that. So we do have a vision for justice in Scotland. And that's a 3-year delivery plan. It contains an action to engage with key stakeholders to inform and shape future legislative proposals in relation to the reform of legal aid. And I am aware that in February this year, the Minister for Victims and Community Safety published a legal aid reform discussion paper which sets out the areas of work that we'll be undertaking to improve the legal aid in the short, in the medium and in the long term. And in the programme for government, we reiterated that commitment to take that forward. I
mean, I appreciate that, and I've had sight, obviously, of that paper. But does she appreciate that we are in the final furlong of this Parliament, that, meaningful change will be difficult, that there is frustration, I think, from both the legal profession and people seeking support about the lack of reform, and would she recognise that within that paper that was published in February, these issues aren't actually mentioned, so people leaving an abusive relationship, people requiring support, and would she recognise her role in terms of making sure that we do something as quickly as we can on these issues because of the evidence that we are hearing?
Yeah, Mr. Kane, absolutely. I take that on board, and you'll be fully aware by my evidence that I've given to the Equalities Committee is that I am committed in supporting and challenging my colleagues and providing that sort of overarching equalities themes to, as I said, to support them. Miss Brown is appearing in front of the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee, I believe, next week, and at that she will be able to provide further detail on legal aid reform when she attends that committee. I don't believe that, any further than me giving that overarching commitment towards embedding equalities, I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to delve any deeper into the issues from my point of view, but the opportunity next week will be there with Ms Brown.
Okay. I'm conscious that colleagues have questions, convener, so I'll hand back to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to invite Liz Smith in. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, you said in your opening remarks that the Scottish Government has obviously built a very different social security system, one that the Government cites is much less adversarial, much less intrusive, much more compassionate. Yet we heard from the Scottish Legal Aid Board that when it comes to assessing financial eligibility for help, particularly if they've got to use discretion, that actually they need quite a lot more information than might otherwise be the case. That's a bit of a paradox. Could the Scottish Government comment on that? Okay.
So are you are you referring to sort of like legal aid funding?
Yes, I mean they're making the point that obviously they do have powers for discretion, to use discretion. That's not something that's always very known about, is what they commented in their evidence, but actually to make it effective, to ensure that people are getting the help that they need, they actually need to know an awful lot more information about the claimant.
Yeah.
And so some of the questioning might be a bit more intrusive because it has to deal with sensitive issues to ensure they get that. But that, at the same time, is not one of the funding principles of the Scottish Government's social security system, which is less intrusive.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I can have a go. I suppose sort of like where there is a lack of information and or evidence, sort of like being explained in sort of like the financial eligibility form 2, SLAB can use its discretion to either disregard income or capital where they consider it reasonable to do so in circumstances, or provisionally assess financial eligibility based on the information that is available. Now, solicitors must explain these situations when making an application to ensure that SLAB are aware of why information may be missing and to avoid that application being rejected or abandoned. And, you know, when someone's in an abusive relationship and they may have sort of it may be the result of accumulated several debts, for instance. Now, SLAB will consider these when calculating someone's availability, like disposable income, for instance, and if there's debts such as loans, credit cards, store cards, all of those. SLAB will make an allowance for sort of like whatever the monthly payment is towards these debts, but this, of course, isn't unique just to domestic abuse cases.
Minister, I understand all that, and it's a very, very sensitive area for obvious reasons. But what the Legal Aid Board is arguing is that in order to help somebody effectively, sometimes they have to ask pretty difficult questions to ensure that they get the right information in order to decide whether they should use discretion in certain payments or not. Yeah. And yet, the Scottish Government has built a social security system which shies away from being too intrusive and too adversarial in its approach. Is that not quite a problem in terms of trying to address some of the issues to help these people who very genuinely need support?
Yeah, no, I mean, you raise a very important sort of issue there. I can maybe bring, I mean, I don't know whether any officials would like to come in on that further, but I mean, I can certainly take that away. And apologies that I can't give you a fuller response with regards to social security. It sits within the Cabinet Secretary's thing, but if you would like a further response on that, I'm more than happy to.
I just think in the context of the whole social security, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the south of the border or north of the border, to ensure that social security is effective, we have to be compassionate and understanding about those who are genuinely in need. And I think that's been the overall intention of the Scottish Government, to try to approach it from that angle. The problem is that if you become more compassionate, less adversarial, less intrusive, then potentially, as is the case, as the Legal Aid Board was arguing, you can miss out on some essential information that the individual might not give you for whatever reason. And that is actually quite a substantial problem, because these are the most vulnerable people that we're trying to support. But if they don't provide the information because it's not being asked for, then there's a difficulty.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right to raise that. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the other, we heard also from the Scottish Legal Aid Board that obviously there are barriers in place for people who are applying for civil court orders in some instances. And I just wondered if the Scottish Government has a view on supporting automatic civil legal aid for that kind of situation.
I think I'm going to have to get back to you once I get information from.
Okay, it's just a point. Again, it was a point that came up from the discussions about the Scottish legal aid in its evidence. I mean, I think the whole basis for this is to try to make things as easy as possible to ensure that those who are most in need are getting the support and the benefits that they require. And it seems at the moment that there's a bit of sort of grey area, let's call it that, as to how we go about that. And I think that's come, Convener, right through the evidence that we've taken, and it's to try to ensure that, A, the Scottish Government's aware of all that, but actually can try, through its various agencies, to address some of these concerns. Because I think it is a big conundrum, actually, in ensuring that, as I say, when it comes to that compassion, that's all very well, but if it doesn't drill down on the information we need, we're not going to get very far. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, sort of, I mean, with regards to sort of like the free legal aid, I mean, there would be costs to that, you know, absolutely. But I suppose sort of like just a brief answer to you. If free legal aid was given to the person at risk, then we might also, to ensure that sort of like equality of arms, need to give that free legal aid to also the person that's causing the risk as well. And an application for a civil protection order might be part of a wider family case, like, you know, it could be about child contact, for instance, as well. And if there was free legal aid for the civil protection order element, this might also need to be extended to the whole case, which would then further increase costs. So, you know, from my understanding, you know, and it's not my portfolio area, is that, and you quite clearly say that it is complex, that there are sort of intersecting threads here that need to be unravelled and considered very carefully. But to make that decision, we also need the right information. Yes. And the whole point about this is ensuring that we get the right information from both the claimant and obviously in circumstances where the abuser has been causing difficulty. We need that information as well. And that, as I say, that's the conundrum about how the government approaches its demands of the social security system, and how the agencies who work in that basis are actually asking the right questions. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay. I believe Jeremy wants to come in, but just so, before I bring you in, Jeremy, just touching upon part of that, you know, the protection orders aspect as well. We heard some evidence from, I can't remember, Sophie Berry, in terms of Part 1 of the Domestic Abuse Act hasn't actually formally been put in place, which is causing problems. And I believe that, I know it's not your portfolio, Minister, but I think there's several questions around the whole legal aid aspect that we've heard evidence from, that we're going to maybe have to reach out to you to reach out to the Minister, Siobhan Brown, in that respect, because it is a really sort of complex area. But part of that domestic abuse, Part 1, was the onus is on the police, where at the moment the onus is on the victim, the survivor, and it is really important that we get clarity on that.
Absolutely. You're quite right to, you know, sort of like reach out to the relevant minister on that, I think, you raise a good point. Yeah.
Okay, I'll bring in Jeremy now. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick, again, I appreciate it doesn't fall directly under the Minister's portfolio, but perhaps she could get one of her colleagues to write to us. One of the issues that we haven't discussed, but came up quite a lot in evidence, is around child maintenance and pursuing child maintenance in an appropriate way. And I'm just wondering whether the Scottish Government are looking at child maintenance in any way, any form of review of how it's actually working in practice, particularly for those, obviously from domestic abuse, who maybe don't want to give postal addresses as much information as others. I'm just wondering whether she could write to the committee with any update on that.
I'm always happy to write to the committee. As I said, I was aware of the, you know, the wide scope of the evidence session today, and I was ready to do that. The DWP's child maintenance system is, of course, reserved to the UK government. You know, not holding, as a Scottish Government, the full powers over social security, our ability to sort of make changes is somewhat hindered. But we do welcome the UK Government's plans to carry out a complete review of a universal credit. I know that, you know, it's a common view that the universal credit has been failing the ones that need it the most. So we do hope that the review of the universal credit will address the issues that the Scottish Government has raised in the past. And, you know, as I said, I'm always ready to, we're always ready to work with the UK Government in order to achieve that goal. And I think I have mentioned that the Cabinet Secretary for Social Security met with Stephen Timms, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, to discuss the UK Government's planned review, highlighting some of the key concerns that we have. The Cabinet Secretary will be writing to Sir Stephen Timms, but you know, it's within the scope of the committee as well to write directly to the UK ministers as well as Scottish Government ministers when we're in that reserved and devolved space.
Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you for that, and we can certainly take up that suggestion. Thank you, Minister. So that concludes our questions for today, so thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have a short suspension to allow for a change in witnesses. Our next item of business is consideration of a Scottish statutory instrument, the Council Tax Reduction Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland No. 2 Regulations 2025. This instrument is subject to the negative procedure. Do members have any comments on the instrument? Okay. I invite the committee to agree that it does not wish to make any further recommendations in relation to this instrument. Thank you. Are members content to note the instrument? Okay, thank you. That concludes our public business for today, and we will now move into private.